Okay, we're recording now.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Hello to all those watching the recording. Okay, so we're going to look at the topic. We're going to complete this one, this question of this teshuva that we started last time. Oh, got to get to the top. Sorry, I was reviewing it just before the class, so it's open on my computer to the bottom, but we'll get up to the top. There we go. Veal calves, and we're going to see there are two questions. One is, how do we apply the question of Sa'ar Balei Chaim, the pain that we are not supposed to cause to animals, with the question of eating animals in general? Well, very specifically, so the question of veal is um, are veal calves grown in a way that is so cruel that their meat should be prohibited? That's one question. So what? Because we're not questioning, are the animals slaughtered properly, because the rules of kashrut have to do with, is this the kosher animal? Was it slaughtered in a kosher manner? And if it satisfies those, then we would say the animal is kosher. Now we're adding something, and the question is this a legitimate concern? And I have a second concern, which I have not been able to fully figure out, which is, what if the circumstances in which the veal calves are living is no longer as cruel as they once were? Do we still have some sort of any aversion to eating veal calves, even if the issue of being cruel to them, do we have a certain aversion, shall we say, to eating veal? Okay, I will say this: I can't remember when I ate veal. I swore off veal long time ago, primarily because of some of the issues that we will see here. Okay, so let's just quickly review some of the things that we had from last time. I just want to adjust my screen a little bit here. If you give me a second. Okay. All right. So the question was from Rabbi Pamela Barmash, who wrote the book that we have been using. And this is the actual teshuva itself. And you remember she has a number of questions. Actually, let's go back. Let's just,
Brian, can you make it clearer?
uh, how's that?
Better.
I just made it
Thank,
larger. Does that
thank
work?
you.
Everyone can see that? Okay, good.
Me, it's better.
Okay, yeah, I know. I have some of those problems at times myself. Actually, I want to open another document before we begin. And I need to, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I know we looked at it last time, but let me see if I can find it. Okay, let me open that. Okay. All right. Let me now go back to the sharing. Okay, yeah. So remember that Rabbi Barmash herself, who not only wrote the teshuva, but she has some questions about it, right? How does she shape the question? Um, why does she start with how veal calves are raised? In other words, she doesn't even start by saying, they're slaughtered properly, they chew their cud, they have split hoofs. So let's just take that off of the table. But she starts with this question of how they are raised. Um, and notice the authorities. And how does that prohibition about selling, is it not, here's a good question. If you can't eat it, can you sell it? What if you're a kosher butcher and or a caterer and you personally don't eat it? Can you offer it on the menu, make a profit from it? Okay, that's an interesting question as well. And does this, what she say, does that apply to other animals? Okay, so these are some of the questions that she raises. She herself raises against her about her paper, and we'll take a look at those as we go along. Okay, so let's go back again to the teshuva itself. Just there. Okay. All right. So here it is. This is the question, and we started looking at it. Consider it notice, she raises as she herself asks, why does she ask it this way? She doesn't say, oh, they're slaughtered in a kosher way. She really starts with considering the conditions which real calves are raised. Do the halakhic prohibition of tsa'ar balei chayim, inflicting suffering on animals, and azkariyut. As we'll see, that there are two issues that are raised in some of the sources: tsa'ar balei chayim, pain to animals, and azkariyut, cruelty. Not only is the animal suffering pain, but if we inflict pain on animals, what type of a person are we? What type of a person is a person who kicks little dogs? What would we say? Would we say about that? The wicked witch of the West is wicked not only because she's wicked towards people, but she doesn't seem to like little dogs either, right? We know that, and that's just one of the character why she is seen as so wicked. And such a matter, here she goes. Selling, notice she starts with, of course, selling, purchase, and consumption are all of these things, because you could argue, well, you really might not want to eat them, but for some people to make a living, you might argue that the rules are a little bit more flexible, right? She doesn't want to deal with that at all. She says, no, let's go with the whole package here of selling, purchasing, and consuming it. Okay, so we've gotten to the point last week where we talked about Tsar Balei Chayim. We were actually down to some of we looked at it's forbidden to purchase a domestic or wild animal or bird if one does not have the means to feed it. You can't, there has to, after all, you could argue, hey, wait a second, we kill animals for food. Duh, isn't that cruel? And so how do you distinguish between that and, for example, up until not long ago, 150 years ago, let's say, animals were the primary source of labor for factories, for transportation. What happens when you have no machines? Was causing animals tsa'ar balei chayim, was that involved in the way that animals were used to carry things, to move things, to be in a society in which it was not unusual for animals to be suffering because of the work that they were doing, because we did not have the machinery. So you have, right, one of the necessity to have good food requires that animals be killed. Okay, anyone want to argue that one? Yeah, could we? There are people who argue that today. Wait a second, they'll say, not unlike this is Rambam, Maimonides, right? Maimonides is saying to have good food. So some people might even question, well, you could be a vegetarian or a vegan and be fine. But he says to have good food, and well, she's not dealing with this. You may recall at some point we looked at this question of, does the joy of Shabbat, Oneg Shabbat, and the joy of the holidays, v'samachta b'chagecha, be happy in your festivals, does that imply eating meat? And to this day, right, a big festive meal will usually include meat. There'll be a vegetarian option nowadays, right? But we generally accept the idea that if you're having a big festive meal, meat is part of the definition of that to this day. Okay, all right. The aim was to kill them. So how do you reconcile? Well, wait a second. I'm killing animals. What are you telling me? I can't be cruel to them. I'm killing them. It was forbidden to torment them through killing them by piercing the track or cutting off one of their members, right? What is called Aver min hachai. No, you can't cut a leg off of a cow and the cow's still alive and then cook the leg or cook or do anything that cruel. But notice it is said that to have good food. Okay. So here's where we were last time. The need to train human beings not to act cruelly regulates human behavior. We had that question in the why do you say that in the Torah, it is forbidden to take on a bird's nest to take the mother and the young. And there was a difference of opinion. Some commentators said, well, if you take the mother and the young, you're causing pain to the mother bird who sees that her eggs are being taken. So we don't take the mother and the young because we're being cruel to the animal. And another position was, no, we do it because by taking the mother and the young together, you are doing something cruel, and it makes you into a cruel person. So you see the two issues. The need to train human beings not to act cruelly regulates human behavior beyond the prohibition of inflicting suffering on animals. So she's arguing, well, we have actually two mitzvot, the prohibition of askariyut, as she'll say, cruelty, plus tsa'ar balei chayim. Okay. And then you can talk about medical experimentation. The Ramah, who's late Middle Ages, the Ramah states that anything necessary for human beings, whether for medical needs or anything else, overrules Tsa'ar Balei Chayim. Nonetheless, certain acts should be avoided based on other considerations if human beings should avoid behaving cruelty to animals. Therefore, what do you see now when cosmetics are advertised? I guess it's become natural.
Yeah, no animal testing.
No animal testing, right? Used to be, right? They would test it on animals, and sometimes it could be causing great pain to animals. So now we expect that. And of course, at the end of any movie that you watch that has an animal in it, what do you see? If you stay that long to read the credits, what does it say at the end?
No harm to the animal.
No harm to the animals, right? You're watching a Western. I mean, I can't imagine when any of you have seen the movie Stagecoach, right? With the John Wayne, that early John Wayne movie. That was made in the 1930s. Yeah. I cannot imagine that. Well, maybe anyone remember that one?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Charlie, you may recall when the Native Americans were about to attack the stagecoach, a lot of horses were falling in that. Remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. I wonder if the standards that they used on taking care of the horses in that movie would be the standards that would be acceptable today. My guess not, right? I mean, it was pretty grisly for some of the horses. Okay. So we, as a society, the mitzvah of Tsa'ar Balei Chayim was not established 50 years ago or 100 years ago. It goes back to the Bible. But as a society, we really haven't been as sensitive to it until more recent times, right? The ASPCA didn't, I think its origins were in Great Britain in the late 19th century. So we know, and certainly horses, when they were the primary means of transportation, were not, many of them were not treated well. Okay. And, they talk about shearing sheep. We had this long discussion, if you may recall, about pulling feathers from a goose. Does that pain the goose? Because you need the goose feathers to make mattresses or pillows or hats or whatever. Okay.
What about horse racing?
Horse racing is an interesting question. I'll just make a couple of observations about that. Number one, it's probably not as popular as it used to be, right? I think partially because we're concerned about that. And two, yes, there have been some very public concerns about doping and about how horses are treated. So I think horse racing is much more regulated now. I can't give you a date, but my guess is that horse racing, 100 years ago. Remember bear baiting? Okay, we all read Shakespeare, and you remember the footnote about bear baiting? The problem with bear baiting was not that it hurt the bear, was that it gave pleasure to the people watching it. And in a very strict society, that was not considered to be a good thing to do. So yeah, there were definitely dog fighting.
Oh yeah, right.
Which is now prohibited, but not so long ago it was not. And to this day, what was that? There was a football player who really got into big trouble.
The quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, I forget the name, but
Yeah.
dog fighting, right? You see it on Law and Order, right?
He got a jail sentence.
Yeah, and then there's and chicken. What about chicken fighting,
Fighting.
right? Robert Hughes.
Rooster.
A lot of these activities are now prohibited, while it was not so common. So yeah, it is. Here's something that comes from the Bible, but many of the implications were not put into effect till fairly recent times. And I think a great deal of that change has been is that we no longer the first of all, I think the fact that there were horses around and ox and other animals that were beasts of burden, they were not seen as as objects that we should really be as concerned with their pain. We've changed. Okay, okay. So as she points out, we have these two countervailing forces: Tsa'ar Baalei Chayim and Sorech Adam, human need, right? So the balance can be shifted because we also prohibit azkuriyot, in other words, cruelty. Okay, if you want to eat animals, you can eat them, but you can't be cruel to them. So you try to have them slaughtered in a humane way. All right. Focus on the human being who causes pain to an animal, how this cruel behavior changes the perpetrator for the worse. In other words, if you're a person who's cruel to animals, that will make you into a cruel person, and therefore we don't want cruel people. We have a system of laws and rules that are established, so people should not be cruel. Okay. And the measures of the pain suffered by an animal that can be negated by the benefit to the human beings, whereas the prohibition of askariyut, cruelty, prevents cruel behavior from becoming the normative form of behavior for a human being. Wouldn't that nice to be live in a society in which cruelty was prohibited? Okay, we like to think that our laws about treating animals, but okay. Yeah, again about medical experimentations. We talked about that. Plowing, right? At one point, all the plowing was done by animals. Now, of course, it's done by machines. For the prohibition of cruelty is a character trait of piety, based on the saying of the sages that a Jew must have the traits of compassion and humility. Okay. While many hold that human necessity alone nullifies the prohibition of inflicting suffering to animals, i.e., I want to eat meat, so I have to kill the animals, avoiding cruelty can serve as an alternative reason for banning the harsh treatment of animals, a reason not nullified by the consideration of human needs. So we are balancing things. Yes, there are people who will say you shouldn't kill animals at all. Even though kashrut allows you to kill animals, you shouldn't do so, because nowadays we can eat without having animal foods. But in general, there is this balancing. Okay. Now the process of killing, whether by shechita, kosher slaughter with a very sharp knife or gun, is not a violation, but causing an animal pain for the sake of slaughter is. That while hunting is permitted according to law, it is unseemly because only the worst sorts of people engage in it, and it is ultimately prohibited because participating in hunting puts a person in danger of attack by wild animals. Why can't you hunt animals? You're causing them pain, or you're putting yourself in danger. Now, here's a question. Yeah, Ed, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I had to step out for a minute, but I just took a look, and it may be it's a pretty big number. We're talking about the horses and the horse track. That in
Yes.
2024, they reported somewhere in the number of 850 horses dying on the tracks or at horse tracks in the United States alone. And the number they say could be much higher, 1,500 to 2,000, with the number of horses that were euthanized later.
Well, that's a good argument for the prohibition of horse racing, right?
Pretty big, a lot bigger than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I'm surprised as well.
Yeah.
That
I think the injuries weren't in the race itself. Many of them were malcare in the stables. I don't think all these injuries happen on the race track. I
Well, I
doubt
think,
it.
but I assume it's a significant number that they may not occur in a race, but in training for the race. In other words, running fast around the track. Again, I don't know if it's, there's no breakdown, is there, Ed?
Well, the breakdown was that there was, in one year they said 440, another year 600, another year 850 at the track is what they said.
Or at the track is really in the stables, not on the race course
Well,
itself.
Well, it doesn't matter.
well,
Well, I mean, it's just a matter of they're not
it's not
dying in front of the
distinguishing.
spectators. I've never seen any horse die in the race itself, but I mean, maybe it's happened. It's very rare,
But
but it
we're
does
not
happen
talking,
often.
yeah,
In
we're
the
not talking about
stable,
necessarily the race, Charlie. It is also possible that in the training for the racing, when the
yes,
horse
that's
is
true.
running very rapidly,
Yes.
but we don't have a breakdown. That's an interesting. Let's ask the larger question: is horse racing kosher? Is horse racing an activity that Jews should be not only spectators, what about investors or bettors, right? I don't have an answer to that, but it's an interesting question. Maybe we'll start next year. See, I have no idea right now off the top of my head whether this has been something that has been approved. Now you have greyhound racing as well, but there, my understanding is that I don't think we're talking about grave injuries to the greyhounds, and they're usually adopted after their racing careers are over. I've seen them in the park, old greyhounds, especially. But that's a good question. Is horse racing, or is it, like anything, sometimes an activity that probably should be prohibited is so well established in the society that other factors may come into we haven't prohibited smoking, right, as a society, but we clearly see that there were Jewish rules that would say that smoking is not something that one should be doing because of the danger.
Boxing, they
Boxing,
inflict pain and injury upon each other in front of the spectators. I mean, that's all injury and
that's
all
right. That's
blood and
correct.
gore.
And there were those, and I would argue two things. One, there are those who would say it should be. One, two, there were historical times where Jews were very proud of their Jewish boxers, right? In England and in the United States. Wow, we got a Jewish, and not so long ago, there was a guy with Jewish stars on his shorts, you know? So these are all interesting questions. Okay, Rini.
I think I think um, that horse racing is cruelty to animals, and you may think that plowing a field might be cruel in some ways too, but it's a necessity for eating. And I have a feeling that people who used animals for work took care of them because they needed them to be healthy to work, whereas
Right.
horse racing is for entertainment only. And as far as boxing is concerned, I personally hate it, but we have adult humans who choose to do that. No one, I don't know why they choose to do that, but no one is doing it for them. No one is, like horse racing. The horse doesn't have a choice.
Well, the people go into boxing because they can make a lot of money if they're very
Well,
successful.
but that's their choice. That they're
Well,
choosing to subject themselves
okay,
to.
those are interesting questions about
Yeah,
the propriety of boxing. If we're talking here, you can't hurt an animal because by hurting an animal, that will make you cruel, right? That's part of the argumentation we have here. What
right.
about punching another human being? You know,
But
uh,
you're also getting punched. It's your choice to also get punched, whereas the animal has no choice.
okay, good
That's
questions, and maybe worth seeing if there's any ethical discussion about boxing, horse racing, greyhound racing,
And you talked about this with football.
Yeah, football, yeah. As a matter of
Same
fact,
thing.
thank you. Football, you may recall, there were some rabbis who argued against football, right? Who said on Super Bowl Sunday, you should have a study session at your synagogue. I'm not making this up, right? We saw that. So there's that question. Is the cruelty or the possibility of injury overcome by the entertainment, the fact that it's so well established? You know, as I've said myself, I like watching football, and I read those sources, and you know, it's disturbing, but I still watch football, so I don't know. It's
That's because you're human.
I still like watching football. Anyway,
Yeah,
but those other questions are okay, because notice, because when you say Tsar Balei Chaim and you should become a vegetarian, right? That is pushing the value beyond where it was normatively practiced. Even if you argue that in the Garden of Eden they were vegetarians, and in the world to come they'll be vegetarians, and I have many Jewish friends who are vegetarians, and part of the issue is Tsar Balei Chaim. But for most of us,
what
including
about
myself,
the ethics of picking the fruit and the people who have to pick the fruit and they have been abused in the past? In other words, is just vegetarian, yeah, but how do you get the vegetables? What?
oh yes, as a matter of fact, there was a kashrut organization that considered grapes to be unkosher during the great grape boycott. Remember, of Cesar Chavez. Some of you may recall them. Or Cesar Chavez was saying we shouldn't eat certain agricultural products because of the way the agricultural workers were being treated, and there was a rabbinic group that agreed with him and put a ban. So Charlie, I mean, there's even a larger question, which I hope to take up next year, which is how far up the ethical chain do you go in buying a product that in one step along the way may have been a violation of our ethics, i.e. child labor, below you know, very low cost, forced
What about
labor.
Nike sneakers?
Nike sneakers. I don't wear Nike sneakers. They don't fit me. Okay. But but anything, a lot of the clothing that you buy, the question is how far up the chain and how much do you need to check that far up the chain when you buy something, right? Ethical investing. How about your IRA?
right.
You know, does it own stock in companies that don't act ethically? Okay, these are good questions. And actually, this question of ethical investing and how far up the chain, shall we say, it's not the food chain, but it's the what do we call it?
Production.
The production chain, or the what is it called?
Hierarchy.
I don't know. Whatever it is, how far up do you go? And how much do you have to check? Right? These are similar questions. I mean, these are ethical standards that we believe that we should live for. And what do you do? And like I said, do you have to invest in socially conscious mutual funds, or can you just buy the 500? Yeah, I assume everyone understands what I just said.
Mhm, mhm.
Okay.
We have discussed this
Yeah.
actually with our financial advisor, and we have chosen not to invest in certain stocks because of that company. But there are certain, you're right, big funds that you can't say, I'll invest in that, but take out so and so.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't want to invest in this company because they do something that I find to be. I don't like I think Wells Fargo Bank was doing some unethical things a couple of years ago. And okay, we'll get to that. We'll get back. We're trying to get back to this.
That'd be
Okay.
interesting.
Ed, and then we'll get back to Rabbi.
Yeah, I don't want to beat this horse to death, but the statistics show that between 13 to 25% of horse deaths at the track occur from what's called sudden athletic death. That means during the race, while they're either working out or actually during the race.
15 to 20%.
13 to 20%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
That's probably
Then
true.
we have
but-
our statistic. So again, is that enough to make us say that horse racing is an activity that should be prohibited? My guess is there's something. I'll do a little research. Okay, that's a good question. By the way,
Well, it's more
those two
closely
sports.
regulated.
I'm sorry,
It
Charlie.
is regulated, and they've
Yes,
suspended
absolutely.
some trainers and jockeys for
Absolutely.
mistreatment.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, yes.
They are regulated.
In the world of athletics, there are ethical standards, and people who violate them can't get into the Hall of Fame, at least for now. But we do know that there are standards. So that's a good. I think that's a really a good question as to what should be done. But let me point out this, just to throw that. Okay, I said I was going to go back. I would argue that both boxing and horse racing don't have the popularity in American society that they once did, right? There was a time when I could name for you every world heavyweight champion and go back 5 or 6 of them. How many sitting around here can even name the world heavyweight boxing champion and name the ones who were the world heavyweight boxing champions before them, as you could at one time,
Are
right?
they still doing that? Are they
Of course,
still?
of course it's still boxing.
They are?
Sure. You don't even
Okay.
see, we don't even know. But when Muhammad Ali was the world heavyweight boxing champion, did anybody here not know that?
That's true.
Right? So I wonder if there is a factor there that has become less of an issue. Of course, you have this ultimate fighting, which from what I understand sounds worse.
Oh, it's terrible. They beat each other to a pulp.
Yeah, I mean it's even worse. But that's probably well, wrestling, as we all know, is a big fake. So that's just another story there.
Well,
It's entertainment.
Let's get
Yeah.
back to this.
Yeah,
I do want to
yeah.
finish this today. Okay. She deals with the question of foie gras. Someone knows what foie gras is. It's when you literally force feed geese to make their livers very fatty and big, and then you slaughter the goose and you chop and you chop and you chop. It's very fancy chopped liver from a goose, but the goose has been force fed. Clearly, it's cruel. And the Supreme Court of Israel issued a ruling declaring the production of force-fed geese to be illegal because it violated the cruelty to animals law. Supreme Court of Israel is not a halakhic authority. They're just a secular court, and they said no more foie gras. Okay, and foie gras consumption has significantly gone down. Okay. The majority and minority opinions in the Supreme Court in Israel argue that the force feeding of geese causes great suffering. So, I mean, I don't go to fancy restaurants. I don't go to I don't think foie gras is as big a thing as it used to be, but I could be wrong.
But I would make the argument, Rabbi, that the foie gras issue has more to do with our knowledge about the fat and what it does, the cardiac effects that it does to the force feeding of the geese. Most people, unless they're real foodies, I don't think realize that that's how the foie gras gets created.
Right, and they've been laws in the United States. I remember reading not that long ago trying to prohibit that. I don't know where that stands, but in Israel it was banned. Okay, so let's take a look about veal. Calves are a few weeks old, kept in conditions, restrain their movements, fed only a milk substitute, and given restricted amounts of waters, not given any solid food, had a negative effect on the normal development of the digestive system. Milk substitutes, anemia, diarrhea. The calves are in narrow individual cages, prevented them from turning around, prevented them from lying down or getting up, prevented the animals from having any contact with other calves, prevented them from seeing another calf, causing unreasonable social isolation. That's the classic way. It happens in Israel, happens in the United States, of course, all over the world. And the European Union began to say, no, this is not right. Okay. So there are now some standards and changes that were recommended, where they should have iron intake increased, they should not be isolated, sufficient space, they should not be limited to milk, living quarters should have adequate ventilation. So here's now here's a question. Okay, suppose now the calves aren't being reared as cruelly as they once had been. Would you still eat veal? Do you have a problem with their young calf? Is there a difference? Do you feel different between the little calf and the big ox or bull being slaughtered? That's a Carol, go ahead. Carol,
I do now. This is sort of an awakening for me. I never thought of it before.
But like I said, what if you got rid of all of those difficult situations that what if they were reared without all of these isolation, the food, the crazy little cages? Would you eat veal if it was not being raised in cruel circumstances?
But still, the idea of killing such a young calf just because I find that meat more tender
Tasty?
is bothering me now, and I choose now not to eat veal.
Okay, Rini.
Well, I haven't eaten veal probably in 40 years at least, but we have had 2 baby deer hanging out in our backyard right by my deck. It's sort of like deer daycare while their mother goes off. And deer is kosher. They choose their cut. They have a split hook. And I was thinking about that. Would I want to take that baby deer? They're really very young, and kill it just for my own food? And the answer for me is no.
Is it because it's too cute?
Yeah, well, they're babies. They haven't been kept in cages. I mean, they're wild animals. They just happen to like my backyard.
Okay, so what if the deer's what if Bambi's mother was captured and kosher slaughtered? Would you eat it?
Well, I eat beef, so I don't know. I don't eat much beef, but I do eat it. So if an animal has lived a life, I guess that would be different from a baby for me. And that's how I feel about veal too. It's, what about lamb?
What about lamb? Gee, let me think. Lamb, what does that mean?
Yes.
Right. We know what lamb is. That's a good question. Charlie, Rini,
I was going to say that in the
Charlie, go
Torah,
ahead.
in the Torah, we take the baby birds and send the mother away. I mean, they're the
That's
baby
true.
birds.
But they
take them.
don't say anything about the lamb.
No,
right?
no, I know, but they say about the bird, the young bird we take, and the mother bird flies away. We let
Right.
her go.
Right.
Saying that there's a value judgment there with the taking the young and not the old.
That's correct. That's correct. Okay. Let's see if we can just finish this. I know this is really leading into some, I think, this is leading into this questions of the nexus of halacha, strict reading the law, and the ethics that is behind the law, and do we apply the ethics in a more stringent way than has been applied in the past? That's one of the larger questions we're asking here. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who was one of the great halakhic deciders for the Orthodox world, he did look at veal. This is a while ago. I don't have the date. I'm sorry, I don't have the date on it. Considers whether the prohibition of inflicting suffering on animal applies to the case of veal calves. He notes that while causing pain to animals is permitted for human need, i.e., you can slaughter animals, it is not permitted to cause them pain needlessly, even if it brings profit. Okay, so we see that the person is not permitted to do anything to an animal to cause them pain if he gains profit, but only which is okay. It is not inflicting pain is permitted if it is for the purpose of food. The prohibition of inflicting pain on animals would not be sufficient to forbid the raising of veal calves in the way it is done for food. So in other words, finally he does come and say, the decisive reason for forbidding veal, according to his very strict Orthodox rabbi, is that the light-colored flesh of veal calves is thought to be by consumers to be healthy, but that's not true. Those who raise these animals and send the meat are swindly consumers. And Feinstein is totally wrong about this, by the way. People didn't eat veal because they thought it was healthy. They ate veal because they liked the way it tasted, right? I mean, they enjoyed the taste of veal. So what happens is ultimately, the prohibition extends what she's going to talk about. The basis for any provision, including as karyot, assessing how it serves to restrict what is done. And so she is going to, that's what we're going to finally go down to some of her conclusions. She's still got another 10 pages to go. So her point, now this was written in 2007, okay, 18 years ago. The condition in which the overwhelming majority of veal calves, more than 90% of the veal calves in the United States, are raised is so awful, deplorable, beyond the conditions in which other animals raised for food are kept, that the principle of Tsar Balei Chaim. She's saying in 2007, that at this time, 90% are not being raised in a humane manner. So let's go to her summary. Veal are raised in appalling conditions. There's Tsar Balei Chaim. In response to the claim that human necessity, Tzorech Adam, overrides, cruel behavior to animals is forbidden, even when it benefits human beings. Jews should be cultivating the character trait of compassion. Talks about the what's happened in Israel. And so she says, the American Veal Association has recommended to its members that the entire industry from the United States convert from individual stalls to group housing by 2000. She's writing, this is just when she's writing this. In response to animal welfares, we strongly urge the Ministry of Agriculture directives, the ones from Israel and our recommendations, that the American veal industry be in. So she's saying, at the time I'm writing this, it's not being implemented. They should be implemented. But at the time she's writing it, Vasak, the conclusion, we rule that only veal from animals raised under humane conditions can be sold. So she's saying that, okay, they're cute and little, but if you raise them humanely, you can eat them. So, that's that question that I raised. Purchased or consumed. In other words, it's not only, you cannot be involved in any commerce. Humane standards for the raising of veal calves include sufficient space, right? Proper nutrition, that's appropriate, dry, clean bedding, and no isolation. That's her conclusion. Do we agree with her conclusion?
I personally agree with it because I think banning things is the worst case scenario. I think I'd rather reform the industry or the practice and get humane conditions going instead of the inhumane, and keep the product available for those who want it.
Anyone else? She would say that if the veal is raised under humane conditions, the implication would be that you could eat it. But at the time that she's writing this, she's saying that 90% is not, and therefore we should not. Any other comments on that conclusion? All right, let me open. I need to open up one other doc. I actually have several other documents I want to take a quick look at, but I seem not to have opened all of them. So give me a moment to find it. There we go. don't know what's going. I'm sorry, it's taken me a second here to get this done correctly. Okay, yes. Okay, one last word, well, two, before we finish. I want to just take a look at there. There's an a modern Orthodox rabbi in England. Here he is. We took a quick look at this once before. Let me make it larger so we only get one. There we go. Okay. This is written by a modern Orthodox rabbi named Natan Slifkin, who is the director of the Biblical Museum of Natural History in Beit Shemesh in Israel. He has an interest in food, and he makes the following. He says, we have a situation, right? He talks about some of the problem about factory farming. Let's say, we know about factory farming, right? That's how a lot of our chickens and beef animals are. So what do you do in a situation which, according to some halakhic authorities, it is permissible, albeit unfortunate, while according to some halakhic authorities, it is problematic? What if the animals, not just the veal, what about the chickens? What about some of the beef? It usually happens that the consumer is presented with a choice. For example, this is from an Orthodox rabbi. When it comes to arba minim, lulav and etrog, there's a range of different opinions. Some are only kosher according to some and are cheaper. Others are mehudar. You sometimes see that word mehudarin, that this is the choice, the excellent, the strictest possible, and more expensive. In contemporary Orthodox and especially Haredi society, there's an emphasis on fulfilling halacha according to all opinions, and in doing so, the most mehudar way, even if it costs more money. You have to spend $300, $500 on an etrog lulav, not $50 or $100 on an etrog, because there are some deficiencies in this etrog that some strict rabbis would say this is not a kosher etrog. Right? There are some who say you have to buy the best and the one that is clearly acceptable to all. So he asks a simple question. Well, if you do that for a lulav and an etrog, what about your food? Furthermore, even if there is no technical infringement on the laws of Tzarei Baalei Chaim, can anyone really say it's fine? Rav Melamed discusses the topic of hens that are starved in order to make them enter a new cycle of laying eggs. Although there's no technical problem of Tsar Baalei Chaim, however, someone who wants to conduct themselves via Midas Chasidut, in other words, the more strict trait of being, shall we say, more reverent, will refrain from doing this. So you have authorities ruling that there is an actual problem of Tsar Baalei Chaim, and you have authorities saying that Midas Chasidus would be to refrain from such a thing. In other words, maybe you want to be more strict about what you eat. And if you're more strict about your etrog and lulav, and you're more strict about, it seems to be the movement in Orthodoxy, in some parts of Orthodoxy, is to be stricter and stricter and stricter. Well, why aren't you very strict about Tsar Baalei Chaim? Is it just the etrog and the lulav? It seems doubtful whether the Torah would sanction factory farming, according to he says Rabbi Aryeh Carmel, which treats animals as machines with apparent insensitivity to their natural needs. So this is, by the way, I should point out, this Orthodox rabbi is quite controversial in the Orthodox world. He has been condemned by certain other Orthodox rabbis. So what else is new? I don't think that it's viable to say that it is forbidden to eat factory farm chickens. I ate one today myself. I had one on Friday night. I'm sure it was factory farmed. I mean, I didn't say it. Let's put it this way: if it doesn't say if it doesn't say it isn't, I'm assuming it is, and I think that's a fairly safe question. But is that virtually nobody cares about having a different option available? So he's asking the questions. I plan to discuss some efforts that have been made, some which are commendable and some which are problematic. But certainly any God-fearing Jew who prides himself on trembling before the word of a God By the way, charedim, that means trembling, right? Okay. Should ask himself whether it wouldn't be worth spending a little more on eating food that hasn't involved great suffering to God's creatures. So here you have a dissenting Orthodox voice. Charlie, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, my problem is getting stricter and stricter. In other words, we have halacha. I observe halacha, but let's say going beyond the law. Shiva is 7 days. You could make it 9 days. I mean, the food is the food. I mean, or the esrog is the esrog. I mean, to go beyond what is required, I don't know if that's wise.
That's necessary. As I said to the guy who brought me my breakfast at Mount Sinai Hospital, I like Cheerios and their OU. You have brought me something that looks like round little cereals, and they have a stricter hechsher, and they taste terrible. By the way, I learned the hard way that there is a Cheerios that are supervised by somebody who doesn't like the OU, and the guy who was taking my care of the food in the hospital, he said, you're not the only one to complain about this. But that's the question, Charlie. You're right. How strict do you have to be? But in the issue here of food, do we have to be stricter about Sa'ar Ba'alei Chaim? How strict should we be? Can we be? What about the cost? What about poor people, right? Is this an unnecessary hardship for poor people? Well, what if you're not poor? Are you okay spending more? These are not questions that have simple answers. Let's put it that way. I'm curious to write, and I think I will write a letter to Rabbi Barmash if she feels that veal is okay nowadays, based upon her halakha. Not based upon, they're cute little animals and don't want to eat cute little animals, but based upon how they are reared. Right now, you may say, I don't want to eat cute little animals. And you're perfectly, no one is forcing you to eat veal, right? As a matter of fact, you may notice veal is in most places nowadays very rare. You don't see it on, the veal consumption in the United States has plummeted because of this. Okay. Any final questions, comments, or questions as we are about to bring an end to this?
Okay, my research project for the summer will be to find out how many horse races, how many tracks there are, and how horses die on the
and see, and I would be very curious about if there are historical comparisons. Has that changed? Have the rules become stricter?
Well,
are we more concerned about doping and the pain and the animals that are are destroyed?
Well, that is being done. I saw articles on that they're trying to be more humane with the horses, but when it comes to money, people are going to cheat as much as they can.
That can be true. That can be true. We know that that this occurs in many aspects of our lives. But I like this. I hopefully we can pursue some of these ethical issues in commerce and in how strictly you obey the law. The rabbinical, I haven't read it, but I understand the Rabbinical Assembly did come out with a teshuvah, a report, a halakhic, an issue of Jewish law about ethical investing. I'm curious to read it. I have to tell you, my IRAs and my retirement funds, they're in mutual funds. They were what's called index funds, i.e., I own everything. And at this point, I have no ethical knowledge or concerns about how my investments are run. I don't know. I don't know where the line is. Well,
and there are foreign stocks very often. Some of your portfolio is in foreign stocks.
Sure.
Who knows what they do over there?
That's right. And if you've been following the investment news, foreign stock markets have done much better than the American stock market right now is doing very well. I follow it. I have, I'm retired. I've got time and I'm living off of this. So I do follow it. The American stock market right now is doing well, but there are those who are arguing you should put more money into foreign investments because there are some, I will just say this nicely, there are some uncertainties in the American economic outlook in the future.
There's some uncertainties.
I don't know why, but for some reason there's some uncertainties out there.
And
Anyway,
Iranian oil is also uncertain.
right. So some people saying, you should invest in Chinese car makers. They're making lots of money all over the world. Is that an ethical issue? Would you want the Chinese car makers to do better than the Americans? Well, how do you weigh it? I've read articles about this. Okay. First of all, I want to thank all of you for coming
Thank
to these
you.
classes.
No, we
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you,
Dr.
Rabbi.
Kolak, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Kasha
Yeah,
Koach.
thank you
Thank
so much,
all. And
Rabbi.
let's all enjoy the summer.
Judith,
And,
you look awful pitched.
We'll, I'm sorry, what was that?
What?
No, I said Judith, she looks all dolled up.
Oh.
No,
Your
You're
hair
just
looks
looking,
great.
Judith, you're just looking good.
I do it myself, every morning.
No.
Okay. Anyway, have a good day. Have a good summer.
Have a good day.
Week after
The
Labor
same to
Day.
you.
Same
we'll,
to
Thank you,
you.
Rabbi.
Take care.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Reconvene.
Bye, everybody. Have a good
Bye-bye.
summer.
Opinion.